Meghan Markle just gave Fortune magazine an interview that was supposed to showcase her thriving business empire, her entrepreneurial genius, and her inspiring journey from royal life to American mogul. But if you actually listen to what she's saying, if you pay attention to the details instead of just nodding along to the carefully crafted sound bites, something incredibly disturbing emerges.
Well, I think 5 years ago was a very different situation for all of us. And, Archie was so little, and I had just gotten pregnant with Lily around that same time, so we were nesting.
The timeline of her entire American business adventure doesn't just have a few inconsistencies. It completely collapses under scrutiny. And we're not talking about minor details getting mixed up. We're talking about fundamental contradictions that make you question whether anything she's saying is actually true. Right now, clips from this interview are going viral across social media, and people are finally starting to ask the questions that should have been asked from the very beginning. When did her company actually launch? Did she have a plan, or didn't she? Why does her story about building this lifestyle brand change depending on which part of the interview you're listening to? And perhaps most importantly, why is someone who claims to value authenticity and truth so willing to contradict herself about basic facts? Today we're going deep into every single contradiction in Meghan's Fortune magazine. Sit down and trust me, by the time we're finished, you're going to see a pattern that can't be ignored. This isn't about one small mistake or one misremembered date. This is about a systematic rewriting of reality to fit whatever narrative sounds best in the moment. And once you see it, you won't be able to look at anything she says the same way again. So let's start with the biggest, most glaring contradiction in the entire interview.
I've always loved being able to share. I've always loved being able to cook and entertain. Is there a business here?
The one that sets the tone for everything else that follows. The one that tells you exactly how much credibility to give the rest of her story. Because when the interviewer asks Meghan to rewind 5 years ago, to talk about what she and Harry were planning when they first moved to California, her answer should be straightforward. Instead, what we get is a masterclass in having it both ways, in telling two completely opposite stories at the exact same time, and hoping nobody notices. Buckle up, because this is where things get absolutely wild. The interviewer opens by asking Meghan about 5 years ago when she and Harry left England and moved to Montecito. It's a perfectly reasonable question, right? What were you thinking? What were your goals? How did you envision your new life in America? And Meghan's response is immediate and emphatic. There was absolutely no plan whatsoever. She paints this beautiful picture of a couple who just needed to breathe, to nest, to heal. She talks about how Archie was so little, how she had just gotten pregnant with Lilibet around that same time. They were nesting and healing. That's the phrase she uses multiple times, nesting and healing, like two birds building a home, just trying to create a safe space for their family. She even says explicitly that she didn't have the bandwidth at that time to think about what the big picture dream was. There was no plan. It was just about getting through the next couple years. No plan, just survival mode, just being present for their young children and figuring things out day by day. That's a direct quote. There was no plan. Remember those words because they're about to become incredibly important.
Most people's assumption that if I was going to go into business, it would be fashion or beauty. But those 5 years at home, I wasn't running around wearing beautiful outfits, but I was making a lot of jam.
But here's where it gets absolutely fascinating. The interviewer who asked this question literally opened the entire conversation by referencing how Meghan and Harry planned what their next few years would look like in terms of business impact and philanthropic impact. The question itself was predicated on the idea that they were planning their future, that they had a vision, that they were strategically thinking about how to build their American empire. So which story is true? Were they planning their business ventures and philanthropic projects, mapping out their strategy for maximum impact? Or were they just nesting with no plan, trying to survive the next couple years with young babies? Because those are two fundamentally different narratives, and both of them cannot exist in the same reality. But wait, it gets even more confusing. Because immediately after telling us there was no plan, Meghan proceeds to describe exactly what they were doing during this supposedly plan-free period. They were getting into producing through their Netflix deal. They were creating compelling projects. They were building a business foundation. She talks about how they started working on content creation, how they began thinking about brand opportunities, how she realized her passion for cooking and entertaining could become a business venture. That doesn't sound like no plan. That doesn't sound like just getting through the next couple years. That sounds like a very specific, very calculated plan being executed step by methodical step. Netflix deals don't just happen by accident. Production companies don't build themselves while you're nesting. Content strategies don't develop organically while you're in survival mode with young children. So what we have here is Meghan simultaneously claiming she had no plan while describing in detail the exact plan she was executing. And that fundamental contradiction? That's not a small thing, that's the foundation of everything else that follows in this interview. Now, if the no-plan contradiction was where things started getting messy, the timeline of her actual brand launch is where this entire story completely explodes into chaos. And I mean complete chaos. Because depending on which sentence of this interview you're listening to, Meghan's lifestyle brand either launched a year and a half ago, or it launched earlier this year, or it went through some mysterious rebrand at some point that never gets explained. By the end of this section, you're going to understand why people are calling this the most confusing brand launch story they've ever heard. Let's start with what the interviewer says. She clearly states that Meghan launched her brand about a year and a half ago, and that it went through a rebrand. Okay, so that timeline would put the original launch sometime around early 2024, maybe late 2023. And then at some point after that, there was a rebrand. That's the framework we're working with based on the interviewer's understanding. But then listen very carefully to what Meghan herself says when she starts talking about her company. She says they founded as ever earlier this year. Earlier this year, not a year and a half ago, earlier this year. And she mentions that the first drop was in February or March of 2025. That's the timeline she's giving us. Wait, what? How can the brand have launched a year and a half ago according to the interviewer, but also have been founded earlier this year with a first drop in February or March according to Meghan? That's a gap of over 12 months. That's not a small discrepancy where someone got a date slightly wrong. That's two completely different timelines for when this company actually began. But here's where it gets even more insane.
We founded as ever earlier this year. I think the first drop was in February or March.
The brand Meghan is now calling As Ever was originally announced as American Riviera Orchard. That was the big lifestyle brand launch that made headlines everywhere. American Riviera Orchard with the Instagram account, the aesthetic logo, the whole carefully curated Montecito vibe. Everyone remembers that launch because it was everywhere in the media. So when did American Riviera Orchard become As Ever? Was that the rebrand the interviewer mentioned? And if it was, when exactly did that rebrand happen? Because Meghan is talking about As Ever like it's been the name since the beginning, like there was never anything else. But we all know that's not true. American Riviera Orchard was definitely a thing. It was announced. It had branding. It had social media presence. The interviewer references a rebrand but never gets clarification on what that actually means. And Meghan never explains it either. She just talks about As Ever as if the American Riviera Orchard chapter never existed, like it got memory hold, like we're all supposed to pretend that wasn't the original plan. So we have three completely incompatible pieces of information. Launch a year and a half ago, founded earlier this year, mysterious rebrand from American Riviera Orchard to As Ever, and none of it makes sense together. Let's talk about the image Meghan is desperately trying to sell us in this interview, because it might be the most carefully manufactured piece of personal branding I've ever witnessed. She wants you to believe she's this humble, accidental entrepreneur who just stumbled into building a lifestyle empire. The story goes like this. She was just at home in Montecito, wearing Birkenstocks and sweats like the rest of us, being a regular mom, making jam in her kitchen. And then one day she looked at all this jam and thought, maybe there's a business here. And boom, accidentally became a mogul. It's the ultimate relatable origin story, right? Just a girl making jam, accidentally becoming a business mogul. She even emphasizes how those 5 years at home she wasn't running around in beautiful outfits. She was in Birkenstocks and sweats, just barefoot at home making jam. She's practically cosplaying as a suburban housewife who happened to have a Netflix production deal on the side. But here's what makes this so absurd. While she's painting herself as this humble jam maker who accidentally found a business opportunity, she's simultaneously describing business operations that would make a Harvard Business School professor proud. She talks about analyzing profit and loss statements. She discusses adjusting margins and monitoring spend. She mentions going through operational details constantly to optimize the business. She describes limited edition versus steady-state product strategies. She talks about brand identity beyond the hero product. That's not jam maker language. That's CEO language. That's sophisticated business terminology that comes from someone who absolutely knows what they're doing and has been planning this for a very long time. You don't accidentally stumble into profit and loss analysis. You don't organically develop an understanding of margin optimization while making jam in your Birkenstocks. That's business school knowledge. That's strategic planning. That's calculated execution. And then there's the whole content and commerce integration she describes. She explains how the show with Love Meghan was designed to complement the brand, how they strategically aligned what she shows on screen with what products are available for purchase. That's not an accident. That's influencer marketing strategy. That's exactly the kind of synergy that takes months of planning with multiple teams coordinating across production, marketing, and sales. She even admits that product success is directly tied to television exposure. The flower sprinkles became quite a thing because they were featured on the show. Of course they did. That's how content-driven commerce works. You show people something appealing on a Netflix series and then immediately offer it for sale. That's calculated. That's strategic. That's the exact opposite of accidental. So which Meghan is real? Is it the humble jam maker in Birkenstocks who accidentally discovered entrepreneurship? Or is it the sophisticated business strategist analyzing profit margins, developing integrated marketing campaigns, and building a multi-platform empire with surgical precision? Because it absolutely cannot be both. And the fact that she's trying to sell us both versions simultaneously tells you everything you need to know about how authentic this narrative really is. Now we need to talk about the success metrics Meghan is throwing around, because this is where things go from confusing to straight up suspicious. The headline story she's selling is incredible. Every single product, every individual item, sold out within under an hour on the first drop. Complete sellout, under 60 minutes. For a brand new company from a first-time founder, that would be absolutely unprecedented viral sensation level success. But here's where it gets interesting. Meghan herself admits this incredible success was actually a problem. When everything sells out that fast, you don't learn anything. You don't learn about consumer behavior, about which products resonate, about inventory management or supply chain dynamics. It's just boom, sold out, done, no data collected, no insights gained, just empty shelves and confused founders. So what did they do? They decided to increase inventory by 10 times for the next seasonal drop. 10 times, that's a 1,000% increase. That's a massive scaling decision based on essentially zero data, because the first drop taught them nothing. They're multiplying inventory by 10, hoping to finally get metrics, finally understand their customer base, finally learn something about demand patterns. And then what happens? The 10 times inventory sells out within 4 hours. 4 hours. 1,000% increase in stock. Gone in 4 hours. Once again, amazing success story on the surface. But once again, as Meghan admits, not helpful at all, because they still didn't get the data they needed. They still didn't learn about consumer patterns. It just sold out again, even faster than they expected. Now let's think about this logically for a second. If you have that kind of demand, if customers are so eager to buy your products that they clear out inventory within hours no matter how much you stock, the metric is actually crystal clear. The metric is people want everything you're selling as fast as you can produce it. Scale up production. Increase inventory even more. Meet the massive demand. That's not complicated business strategy. That's basic supply and demand economics. But Meghan keeps framing it as this mysterious challenge they can't figure out. She talks about not being able to gauge how things are going to sell out, especially with global demand. But you've had 2 major drops now. Both sold out within hours. The pattern couldn't be more obvious. Everything sells out immediately, every single time. That's your gauge right there. That's your metric screaming at you. Unless, of course, the story isn't quite as straightforward as she's making it sound. Because in the e-commerce world, there's a well-known tactic called artificial scarcity. You deliberately limit inventory to create the perception of massive demand, to generate urgency, to make the brand feel exclusive and desirable. When everything sells out immediately, it creates buzz. It creates fear of missing out. It creates a narrative of overwhelming success that attracts investors, media attention, and more customers desperate to join the exclusive club. And Meghan's sellout story, it hits every single beat of the artificial scarcity marketing playbook perfectly, almost too perfectly. Let's dig deeper into why this sellout story is so suspicious. Because the more you examine what Meghan is actually saying, the more the cracks appear. She talks about how people in global territories have such an appetite for the products that they're finding workarounds. They're having friends in America buy multiple units and ship them internationally because the brand isn't selling globally yet, and she frames this as the biggest blessing, as proof of organic overwhelming demand. But wait a second, if people are buying multiple units to ship internationally, that means individual customers are purchasing way more than they need for personal use. They're bulk buying, which means the number of actual individual customers is much smaller than the number of units sold. The demand might not be as broad as it appears. It might be concentrated among a smaller group of dedicated fans buying multiple items each. That's a very different business profile than having massive widespread demand from millions of individual customers. And it's something any experienced founder would want to understand deeply. How much of your sales volume comes from repeat buyers versus new customers? How much is personal use versus resale? Or gifting? What's your actual customer acquisition number versus your units sold number? But Meghan doesn't address any of that. She just calls it an unexpected blessing that inventory is moving in ways they didn't anticipate. More proof of organic, unplanned success that they're scrambling to keep up with. Except if you're constantly analyzing your profit and loss like she claims. If you're deep in the operational details, you would absolutely know your customer data. You would know repeat purchase rates. You would know units per transaction. That's basic e-commerce analytics that any platform provides automatically. So either she's not actually as involved in operations as she claims, or she's deliberately not sharing information that would complicate the perfect success narrative. Because the story of dedicated fans bulk buying to resell internationally is very different from the story of millions of individual customers desperately wanting your products. And then there's what she says about the flower sprinkles. She mentions they became quite a thing, really complimented by the show with Love Meghan. This is actually a crucial admission. Product success is directly tied to television exposure. When you feature something on a Netflix show and immediately offer it for sale, of course there's a spike in demand. That's influencer marketing. That's content-driven commerce. But it also means the demand isn't purely organic. It's manufactured through media exposure, which is fine. That's a legitimate business strategy, but it's completely different from the story she's selling about products being so incredible that they naturally create overwhelming demand through quality and word of mouth alone. The whole narrative is that people just love these products so much they can't help buying them immediately. But the reality she's describing is much more calculated. Television appearances drive product sales. Scarcity creates urgency. Celebrity backing generates interest that might not exist based on product quality alone. Limited inventory creates the perception of exclusivity. That's smart marketing, but it's marketing. It's strategy, it's calculation, and the gap between that reality and the humble organic success story she's telling, that gap is where the credibility completely falls apart. Now we need to talk about the Netflix situation, because this might be the most perfectly executed spin job in the entire interview. Meghan manages to take what is clearly a significant downgrade in her business relationship with Netflix and frame it as an exciting new opportunity with more flexibility and creative freedom. And if you don't understand how Hollywood deals actually work, you might actually believe her. But let's break down what really happened here, because the truth is hiding in plain sight if you know what to listen for. The interviewer asks about the Netflix partnership, mentioning it just renewed with slightly different terms. That phrase right there, slightly different terms, is doing massive heavy lifting. Because the terms didn't change slightly, they changed fundamentally, and Meghan knows it. She explains that she and Harry were in an overall deal with Netflix, and now they've transitioned to a first-look deal. And she frames this as an incredible sign of the strength of their partnership. Let's pause right there, because in Hollywood terms, that's like saying getting demoted from full-time employee to freelance contractor is proof of how much the company values you. It's spin, it's damage control, and it's banking on most people not understanding the massive difference between these two deal types. So let me explain what actually happened. An overall deal, which Meghan and Harry had originally, is the absolute gold standard in Hollywood. It means Netflix is paying you millions of dollars per year whether you produce anything or not. It's a guaranteed salary. It's a major commitment. It's Netflix saying we believe in you so much that we're paying you to be exclusively ours, and whatever you create belongs to us first. Overall deals are what Netflix gave Shonda Rhimes for over $100 million. What they gave Ryan Murphy for $300 million. These are massive commitments to proven creators who Netflix believes will generate consistent hit content. A first-look deal is completely different. It means Netflix gets to see your projects first before you shop them elsewhere, but they're not obligated to buy anything. They're not paying you a guaranteed salary. You pitch ideas, and if they like something, maybe they'll make a deal for that specific project. If they don't, you can take it somewhere else. It's the difference between being on the payroll and being someone they might work with if your pitch is good enough. And that is not a promotion. That is absolutely a downgrade. But listen to how Meghan spins it. She says it gives them flexibility to go to partners first and then shop content that might not be right for Netflix somewhere else. She's selling this as if they wanted more options, as if being locked into Netflix was limiting their creative vision, and now they have wonderful freedom to work with multiple partners. Here's the reality though. If Netflix wanted to keep them in an overall deal, if Netflix was thrilled with their content and saw massive value in keeping them exclusive, Meghan and Harry would have stayed in that overall deal. Because overall deals come with guaranteed millions. You don't walk away from that financial security for flexibility. The flexibility Meghan describes isn't a feature, it's a consolation prize. It's what you say when the company that was paying you millions annually decides they don't want to make that commitment anymore. And Meghan tries to soften the blow by comparing their situation to Higher Ground, the Obamas' production company. She's suggesting that what happened to them is the same thing that happened to Barack and Michelle Obama, so it must be totally normal and prestigious, right? Except that comparison actually proves the opposite point. The Obamas also went from an overall deal to a first-look deal, and while their team spun it positively too, industry insiders understood what it really meant. The initial overall deal didn't produce the massive hits Netflix hoped for. So when renewal time came, Netflix offered a less expensive, less committed arrangement. It's not an evolution, it's a restructuring that benefits Netflix, not the creators. And you can actually see evidence of this shift in how uncertain the future of With Love Meghan has become. The interviewer asks about season 3, and Meghan's answer is tellingly vague. She mentions a holiday special coming in November, which is great, but when pressed about season 3, she doesn't confirm anything. Instead, she talks about how 8 episodes for 2 seasons is a lot of work, how she remembers what production takes from her Suits days, how people want content in different formats and sizes. She's essentially saying the full season format might not continue, that they're exploring different options, shorter content, more flexible arrangements, which makes perfect sense if Netflix isn't automatically committing to more seasons anymore. If you're pitching project by project under a first-look deal, you have to be more adaptable, more willing to adjust based on what the buyer wants to purchase. That's not creative freedom, that's the opposite. That's having to mold your content to match buyer interest, because you no longer have guaranteed funding security. And here's what particularly revealing. Meghan talks about how the business will of course go on longer than any series, how she's been able to build out her own team and scale it in her own vision. She's already talking about the brand existing independently of the Netflix relationship, about not being dependent on that partnership for survival. That's not what you say when you have a strong, thriving partnership with a major media company. That's what you say when you're preparing for the possibility that the partnership might not last much longer, when you need to make sure your business can stand alone without the Netflix backing. The writing is on the wall. Netflix gave them a chance with an expensive overall deal. The content they produced didn't become the hits Netflix expected. The viewership numbers didn't justify the investment. So when renewal came, Netflix restructured into something less risky, less expensive, and far less committed. That's a business decision. It happens constantly in Hollywood. Production companies that don't deliver hits lose their overall deals. But instead of acknowledging that reality, Meghan spins it as positive evolution, exciting flexibility, a sign of partnership strength. And that spin, that's the pattern we keep seeing throughout this entire interview. So let's pull back and look at the bigger picture here, because by now you've seen the pattern, and once you see it, you really can't unsee it. Every single topic in this Fortune magazine interview follows the exact same formula. Reality gets repackaged, contradictions get glossed over, setbacks get reframed as opportunities, and calculated strategies get presented as happy accidents. Let's recap what we've uncovered, because it's honestly staggering when you see it all laid out together. First, the fundamental no-plan contradiction. 5 years ago, she claims there was no plan, they were just nesting and healing. She didn't have bandwidth for big-picture thinking. But in the same conversation, she describes planning business impact, philanthropic ventures, getting into Netflix producing, creating compelling projects, and strategically building toward a lifestyle brand. Those are 2 completely opposite stories that cannot both be true. Second, the timeline disaster of when the brand actually launched. Was it a year and a half ago like the interviewer states? Or was it earlier this year in February or March like Meghan claims? What happened to American Riviera Orchard? When did it become As Ever? Was that the mysterious rebrand that never gets explained? These are the most basic facts about a business, and the story changes depending on which sentence you're hearing. Third, the carefully crafted accidental entrepreneur narrative. She wants us to believe she was just making jam and Birkenstocks and stumbled into business, but she simultaneously describes analyzing profit and loss statements, adjusting margins, managing complex supply chains, developing integrated content and commerce strategies, and building multi-tiered product empires. That's not accidental. That's sophisticated business strategy that takes extensive planning and expertise. Fourth, the too perfect sellout story that raises massive red flags. Every product gone in under an hour. 10 times inventory sold out in 4 hours, but somehow they can't gauge demand despite the pattern being crystal clear. It's textbook artificial scarcity marketing, but we're supposed to believe it's all organic, overwhelming surprise demand they're scrambling to manage. Fifth, the Netflix deal that went from guaranteed millions in an overall deal to uncertain project by project pitching in a first look deal. A clear downgrade that benefits Netflix, not them. But she spins it as exciting flexibility and creative freedom, comparing it to the Obamas as if that makes it prestigious, when that comparison actually proves Netflix is backing away from creators who didn't deliver expected hits. 5 major areas. 5 different examples of reality being repackaged and resold as something completely different. And in every single case, Meghan is taking situations that are less than ideal, setbacks, challenges, or carefully executed strategies, and reframing them to fit whatever narrative sounds best in that moment. The narrative of humble authenticity, the narrative of accidental success, the narrative of being overwhelmed by organic demand, the narrative of exciting new opportunities when partnerships downgrade. It's masterful PR spin. but it's also deeply dishonest. And once you see the pattern, you can't trust anything else being said. So here's what this all comes down to. We started by asking whether Meghan Markle is an accidental entrepreneur who stumbled into success, or whether this is one of the most carefully calculated rebrands in recent celebrity history. And after dissecting this Fortune magazine interview piece by piece, contradiction by contradiction, spin by spin, the answer is absolutely clear. None of this is accidental, not a single part of it. From the Netflix deal to the lifestyle brand launch to the perfectly timed content and commerce integration, every move has been calculated with precision. And honestly, that would be fine. That's actually smart business. Successful people plan, they strategize, they leverage their advantages. There's nothing wrong with that. But the problem isn't that Meghan planned her American reinvention. The problem is she's pretending she didn't. The problem is the fundamental dishonesty of selling us a humble jam maker story while executing MBA-level business strategies. The problem is contradicting herself about basic facts like when her company launched, what her plans were, and how her partnerships are actually structured. Because credibility matters. And when you can't keep your timeline straight, when you spin obvious downgrades as upgrades, when you claim there was no plan while describing the exact plan you executed, you lose credibility, not just about your business, but about everything. And this matters beyond just Meghan Markle's ventures. This matters because we're living in an age where celebrity founders are everywhere, where famous people leverage platforms to launch brands. And what we're seeing here is a blueprint for manufacturing origin stories that sound relatable, while hiding calculated reality underneath. The struggling royal turned humble entrepreneur narrative is compelling. The Birkenstocks and jam story is relatable. The overwhelmed by demand angle is impressive. But when you actually analyze what's being said versus what the facts suggest, it completely falls apart under even basic scrutiny. So here's what I want you to take away. The next time you hear any celebrity founder telling their inspiring entrepreneurial story, ask yourself some questions. Does the timeline actually make sense? Are there contradictions? Is this story designed to make them relatable even though their circumstances are nothing like yours? Are setbacks being spun as opportunities in ways that defy logic? Because once you start looking for the pattern, you'll see it everywhere. And you'll realize that what we're being sold isn't just products. It's carefully crafted narratives designed to make us feel connected to people operating on completely different levels with completely different advantages. Meghan Markle is not just a mom making jam in her kitchen. She's a sophisticated business operator with Hollywood connections, royal fame, Netflix backing, and a calculated strategy for building a commercial empire. And if she could own that reality instead of hiding behind the humble accident story, this interview would be far more believable. But she can't own it, because the authentic, relatable, accidental image is what sells. That's what generates emotional connection. That's what turns casual consumers into loyal fans. So instead we get contradictions, timeline problems, obvious spin, and a narrative that collapses under scrutiny. The timeline doesn't add up, the story keeps changing, and the carefully constructed image is exactly that. Carefully constructed. What shocked you most? The timeline disaster? The Netflix spin? The sellout contradictions? Drop your thoughts below, like, subscribe, and stay tuned, because the next video is waiting, and you won't believe what's coming next.